He was just 2 months shy of turning 2 years old, a toddler with his whole life ahead of him, until it was taken in an instant. At first, it seemed like a tragic accident. A mother behind the wheel, her young son was in the back seat. And then suddenly, her car veered off the road and plunged into the Trinity River. But what police discovered later was even worse. According to the Fort Worth Police Department, this was not an accident. It was reportedly intentional. I'll walk you through the details. For Law and Crime News, I'm Kennedy Walker. We don't have to go back far. The date was March 22nd, 2025, just before 6 p.m., when first responders were dispatched to a call near the Trinity River Bridge. A vehicle had been seen going into the water and then sinking. According to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, emergency crews rushed to the scene. Divers entered the river hoping to rescue anyone trapped inside. They found 38-year-old Melanie Robinson and pulled her from the vehicle. But her son, Jonas Allen, was missing. The toddler was nowhere in sight. Dive teams searched frantically, but when the car was finally pulled from the water, there was no sign of the little boy. With daylight fading, the search was called off for the night. The next day, they began again, and eventually, they found Jonas. But it was too late. The child's body was recovered lifeless. A balloon release was held in his honor. Meanwhile, Robinson was fighting for her life. She was rushed to the hospital shortly after she was found. According to KXAS, doctors placed her in a medically induced coma. Her family waited, praying that she'd survive, but they never got the chance. Just 3 days later, Melanie Robinson died from her injuries at Texas Health Harris Methodist Hospital. Now, with both mom and son deceased, Fort Worth police launched a deeper investigation, working to find out what led to their car entering the river. What they discovered was gut-wrenching. Police say the death of 1-year-old Jonas Allen has officially been ruled a homicide. Investigators believe Melanie Robinson drove into the river on purpose, killing both herself and her son. According to authorities, this was not an accident. It was an intentional act. Had Melanie survived, she would have been arrested for capital murder of a child under 10 years old. Detectives declined to say how exactly they determined that Jonas's death was intentional. A spokesperson told the Star-Telegram, quote, "We are not at liberty to say what family members, witnesses, and any possible medical history may have been shared with the detectives." Now, instead of preparing for Jonas's second birthday, loved ones are left with funeral arrangements and endless questions. According to his obituary, Jonas enjoyed cheese puffs while watching his favorite shows, The Backyardigans, PJ Masks, and Super Y. He also enjoyed going to the park and riding the merry-go-round and swinging. The writer also added, Jonas loved his mommy and daddy. You saw it when you saw them together. And joining me to talk more about this is Detective Aaron Benzik. Thank you so much for coming on today. At first, police believed that this was an accident, then they ruled it a homicide. Can you explain what their investigation most likely looked like?
Yeah, so you're going to be considering some of the environmental factors there. Like, is this something where a car could have crashed, rolled off the road, ended up in the water? Then you got, a water rescue and an accident that's happened. Or is this something where someone has entered the water in an area that's not, accident based? It's somewhere where someone could be intentionally driving into the water. And one of the things that's going to be really important here is going to be, what are witnesses saying? What information do police have? And it seems like on this one, law enforcement did have information that there may be somebody inside that car going into the water.
And just explain more about that, about just that information about someone else being in the car. Are they looking at surveillance video, or how do they figure all of that out?
Obviously that's something that's helpful. Surveillance video is going to be a little slower though. So our first information that we're getting to law enforcement respond to this scene is that 911 call. Someone's calling in, a car is in the water. And I believe in this case, they had information that there was even a baby inside. So as a first responder, you have a hectic response. You were trying to get in that water, trying to save somebody. And, your first contact is the car as it's going down. And they're able to remove somebody out of that car, an adult female. They're able to get her out of the car. But you have this information that there's still a baby. And I can't process those thoughts that first responders might have had pulling one person out of that car, knowing they're still looking for a baby and can't get to it.
And then there was one point during the search where first responders, they were there that evening and then they had to come back and search for the baby that next day. Why does that sometimes happen, and why didn't they just continue to look that evening for the baby?
Well, they know where the car goes down and they're able to get someone out of the car, but I think it's going to be a case of they can't find the baby. The baby's not inside of the car. So they do get to the car quickly and are able to pull someone out, but it's that agonizing feeling of we're missing something. What can we safely do? We don't want anyone else to be hurt in this rescue process. And I know, that evening they're working, they do get the car out. They're able to pull the car out of the water that evening, but that car doesn't find the baby. The baby's not inside of the car. So now we know that we've pulled an adult out of the car, we've got the car out of the water, and we have this information that there's supposed to be a baby with this adult, and law enforcement can't find that baby. There's not a lot we can do in the dark with the water rescue, so that's where they're revisiting that scene the following day. They know they're looking for a baby, and they're having to use that daylight the following day. At that point, which is likely not going to be a rescue, but it's going to be a recovery operation.
And speaking of that, with recovery, just knowing that there's no way someone could survive overnight in those conditions, the temperature of the water, etc. Uh, was that kind of known, would you say, by the time that they even got to the scene, knowing that no baby could hold their breath for that long after that 911 call?
Well, you're still hopeful when you get there, especially if you're able to pull an adult out of the car. Cars don't go into the water super fast. There's a period of time where they first make entry before they're totally submerged. And in the Fort Worth area, a priority 911 call, law enforcement response is 3 to 4 minutes. So we have a period of time where even once that car goes down, even if after it is fully submerged, there's going to be an air pocket inside of that car. So we do have a period of time that we're working with, but we're having to worry about what are the depths? How far can we safely go down as a first responder? A first responder is not equipped with tools on their belt for water rescue. In fact, we're doing the opposite in a water rescue. We're shedding all of those tools. We're losing our gun belt, getting our vest off so that we can get down there quickly. And that is it's one of those calls that's going to stick with you for the rest of your career, responding to a call, knowing that you're trying to save somebody and knowing that you're missing a baby that's likely there. Just tragic.
What role does an autopsy play in proving a case like this was a homicide?
So if your case is coming together and it's just not something where this was an accident and you have something where believe this car is going to be intentionally driven into the water, once that baby's recovered the following day, an autopsy is going to look at things like, did the baby have prior trauma before it came into the water? Could there have been injury inflicted on this baby by another party before it went into the water? Or is this baby cause of death going to be something related to the drowning cause? So that's what the autopsy is going to help look at and kind of get that whole picture. Because when we're talking about intent, getting that whole picture is really going to help piece that story together.
If the mother had survived, walk us through what would have happened to her legally.
Well, law enforcement's given us a little indication, indicating that this is something that possibly could have been a capital murder case should the mom had survived. And what that means is that they're finding evidence of intent. They're finding evidence that an individual has intentionally caused the death of another. And here in Texas, with that being an individual who is under 10 years of age, that's going to automatically make it a capital murder case. And our punishment ranges for capital murder in Texas, it's two options. It's life in prison or the death penalty.
And how do they just decipher on if they're going to choose to give a person the death penalty or life in prison?
That's something that's going to play out. It's not going to be something that plays out at the beginning very easily. It's going to be something law enforcement is going to bring those charges together, file it with the district attorney's office. And then as you have the DA's office going through and evaluating the case, what kind of arrangements they make, that's where they have the options of the different punishment phases. And there's so many variables involved that you really do see it go either way. And it's just something that the district attorney's office is going to hold that decision point in.
And family members of the mother, they have, alluded to some type of mental health issues or crisis that the mother had, either in that situation or just in the past. She has struggled with just mental health challenges. How do prosecutors handle suspected mental health crisis cases? And how does mental health factor into potential criminal responsibility?
Yeah, so we have a couple things with mental health that obviously, if you have circumstances where someone has intentionally driven their car into the water with their 1-year-old baby inside, things aren't going okay mentally. Things are not good. And we do have some diversion programs in Texas where we can divert cases where mental health is a factor, but those are not going to be cases that violence is involved. Someone causing the death of another, that is not a good candidate for diversion for mental health processes. So how that plays out is the case gets submitted as a criminal case to the district attorney's office, and through the trial, you're working through criminal responsibility. Or could this be something where it's a not guilty verdict could be found by reason of insanity? And we have seen these cases go these different ways in Texas.
If she had survived, would her mental state at the time have potentially led to an insanity defense, like you just mentioned?
It's not an automatic thing that it's going to go that direction. There's a high burden to be able to prove that this person didn't know what decisions they were making because of an insanity. And so there's a huge difference in mental health crisis, and even insanity. So to get that not guilty verdict by insanity, you're having to reach a pretty high burden. So while there may have been mental health concerns, struggles that the mom had, if this is something where she knew what she would consciously doing this and committed this act, this is going to be a criminal prosecution. And mental health does not take away culpable responsibility when causing the death of another.
Well, how does the prosecution technically prove intent then, if it is mental health struggles?
Good question. And, it's going to start with that first 911 call. What did witnesses see? Is this car entering the water in a spot where you have to drive off the road? You have to drive down, past a grass area? Do you have to take some intentional acts to get this car in the water? If it's not something where, you're on a road, it's late at night, it's dark, you're driving. Next thing you know, there's a boat ramp in front of you, and oh my gosh, you're in the water. No, they're going to be looking at what physical actions are taken to get this car submerged in the water that is not accident based. And that's directly right off the bat. What are the witnesses telling us about that, where that car makes entry? And then we're going to start going through, the victimology of the baby, the history of mom. Family has spoken out to different news stories talking about that the mom had just picked the baby up from another family member. So there's going to be family that's close to this mother and child, and those details of what they share is going to be very interesting in piecing together intent. So law enforcement is going to be doing interviews. They're going to be interviewing and speaking with family and learning the story. How do we go from this case of a baby is with a family member and is now submerged in the water? Those details matter. And that's where law enforcement, after they're done with the rescue operation, the recovery operation, now they're switching into that investigative mode and piecing together that timeline, and victimology is going to give them that information.
In situations like this, when a parent reportedly kills their child and tries to kill themselves, but they survive, break down what their defense could look like.
The offense could take a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, facts are facts and things happen. And so while law enforcement is going to take the approach of, after their investigation is finished, collecting their information, if they have probable cause that a crime's committed, law enforcement's filing that charge. A surviving mother might then start piecing together a defense of different things such as insanity and things, but you can't just use insanity defense as a scapegoat to get out of your conduct. Yes, you might be having some mental health issues and concerns that are being addressed, but insanity isn't a escape, get out of jail card. It's a real thing that has to be proven and has to actually exist, not just a fallback to get you out of accountability for your actions.
Absolutely. And regarding this case, could anyone else potentially face charges in relation to the death, like a family member, if they knew about the mother's mental state or didn't do anything to prevent this tragedy?
Well, that's a hard question because, again, for it to be a criminal offense, you have to have, some intentionally and knowingly causing the death of another. And family members being aware of mental health concerns is something that they might have been helping with in their own way, been aware of, but you can't be with someone 24/7 without a lawful reason to detain them. And so while they might have been aware of some concerns and that she needed help, that doesn't necessarily mean that she's going to go and kill someone or kill herself. If they had direct information that she did want to kill herself and kill someone else, you'd hope that family members is sharing that information with law enforcement. And we don't know what the exact circumstances are in this case. We don't know the details of what law enforcement's done. We don't know the details of what family have been doing, how hard they've been working to try to help someone if they needed help, or if they even had optics into what was going on.
If there were, those warning signs and they were reported, is there any legal responsibility on the state or even CPS if there again were those warning signs?
Well, you're hoping our professional partners are always doing everything we can, and that's a tough position because it comes back to, again, unless we have a lawful ability to detain someone and put them under observation or custody, we can't be with people 24/7. So we kind of operate professionally under this motto of doing the most good, do the most good that we can. In this case, had there been prior involvement with professionals, they're going to be looking at what can they do first and best for that 1-year-old child, and then what can they do for the adult. And mental health and CPS involvement, professional involvement is hard because government assistance and government programs aren't a magic bullet that just fixes everything. Law enforcement comes into a house and in 15 minutes, they're having to assess what's going on and fix problems that have been going on for years. And it's very challenging to do. But hopefully, if there had been professional involvement in this mom and this this baby's life in the past, that they've done what they could. They've done the most good. And essentially, we've got to work with what we can. But in this situation, it's led to a tragedy. There's a baby that's dead. And at the end of the day, the responsibility isn't always on someone else. The responsibility is on this mom and what this mom did or didn't do in these circumstances.
Yeah, and speaking of that, what message do you think law enforcement and prosecutors are trying to send by classifying this as a homicide? And I mean, I personally have never heard of it.
Well, if they're saying off the bat that, hey, should the mother have survived in this case, this is a criminal offense we've been investigating. I think it's sending a message that our investigation has revealed a lot of details, that this is not an accident. This isn't a car falling off a bridge into the water or a crash. We believe that there's evidence showing probable causes of criminal offense occurred. So it's them speaking to what their role is. Law enforcement's role is to collect facts, to collect information. What do we have and where does it lead us? And so they are sending a clear message that, hey, we're here and we're seeing information that we believe this to be an intentional act, and they're not trying to sugarcoat things.
Absolutely. And we know that, what I'm about to ask you, I know we can only just speculate, but the moment that they realized that it was a homicide, instead of a accident, what exactly would an accident look like compared to a homicide?
Yeah, that's where your environment, your scene investigation, that original investigation, you're securing the scene after you're recovering and rescuing as many people as you can. You're looking for that environment. Is this a bridge where the guardrail is broken off? What does the environment show? Surveillance video could be covering the area, and for sure witnesses. If this is an area during daytime hours that could be trafficked, our witnesses are going to be giving us information of what they see regarding that car. Then additionally, the car is brought out of the water that night. We're able to look at the car itself, and the car speaks. And the car contains evidence inside that it's able to speak to law enforcement itself on. Car computers inside, we're able to analyze. We're able to determine what are speeds, what's brakes, what brakes were applied, what seatbelts were applied, and the timing of all of those things. So the car itself is a pretty big witness. Should this have been a case where there were no witnesses around, no surveillance video in the middle of the night, we don't know what's going on, our big witness in this case is going to be the automobile. And there's a lot of forensic digital evidence on these cars that can help us understand this story as well.
And you're from Texas. Can you explain the area where this crash happened? And we know the car went into the Trinity River. How deep is that? Is it possible for cars to accidentally go into the water, or is it pretty perfect purposeful when you see one in there?
Yeah, so the Trinity River area is, unfortunately, about a body of water that does involve a lot of tragedies at times. But the roadway around and the surrounding area is controlled in a way to where cars aren't going to accidentally fall off the road and go into the water. The bridges have guardrails going across. There's different through the main roads. There is different environmental obstacles put in place to just keep it from going off. Now there are parts of it where you can drive off. You can go down a dirt road area. You can get to a walking trail. You can intentionally get around it, but it's an environment that's created where this is not an accidental. We don't want cars in the Trinity River. And in fact, this part of Fort Worth and Tarrant County, the Trinity River has a lot of nice things. It's got walking trails that go along it, and it's an area that's frequented by people enjoying the outdoors, and enjoying just kind of the open area in a space that's a pretty urban environment. It's nice to have these green space areas and walking trails. So they do have that created along the Trinity River. It's not designed for cars to be driving up on the banks of it. I can tell you that.
And regarding the child's father, he, as anyone could imagine, is on social media talking about just how heartbroken he is about this situation. Hypothetically, could the child's father pursue a wrongful death lawsuit in a case like this?
Well, which first of all, this is just a tragedy that any father shouldn't have to face or navigate. But outside of the criminal aspects of things, there are civil laws or civil culpability that could happen. Based on the different factors of what was known and when was known. The civil cases really look at what could have been done to prevent this, if anything. And at the end of the day, it's important to talk about prevention. It's important to talk about uh, communicating. People, if you see something, you say something. If someone's not right, if they're not okay, we got to help. And civil cases can look at that, but ultimately at the end of the day, adults do things that they're responsible for, and unfortunately we can't always be with everyone to save everyone in every moment. But there's little things leading up to it that hopefully are talked about, looked at, and as society in general, this is a conversation that we talk about a lot after tragedy happens. We talk about mental health afterwards, but how do we talk about mental health before? People don't want the government detaining everyone just because someone says they're not feeling good or something like that. We've got to address things in a more responsible way based on what we have. And the first step to that is going to be communication. We got to talk about it.
Absolutely. And you kind of just brought this to my next point. Unfortunately, we're hearing about this all the time, right? Cases where children are getting killed by their parents and, terrible things are happening. Is there anything that people can do, even the courts can do, to step in before the tragedies happen?
Well, there are. I mean, obviously, we have our entities like Child Protective Services, whose whole job is to save kids, and they can only work with what they know. They can only work with what they have. So we have to talk about it, and we have to kind of get rid of the stigma of mental health, and how it causes problems. And again, we're assuming that family knew that there was even mental health issues going on. I don't know. We haven't spoken to this family, and this might have been something that had been shielded from them, or maybe had been shielded to the degree that it was. This may not have been something that they knew, but these are the things that'll be coming out over, the next weeks, next months as things start getting looked into. But, to answer your question, family structure, family support is probably the first step and the most important thing. And we have to be vulnerable with our families of what we're going through, and we have to help. But some of our mental health options that we have, we can't force adults into without their cooperation. And how do you get someone to cooperate who's suffering through mental illness and stick with the program? And that's something that, I'm not an expert on myself, but I know that we severely lack in funding on a lot of these things to understand it better, to determine and look into what options do we have, what are things that are helpful, and what are things that we can do. And I think a lot more funding and money needs to go into our mental health, because one child, 1 year old child being lost from a parent driving them into the water is one too many. And we need to be thinking about how can we do better with these things.
Absolutely. And we're hoping that stories like this help save at least one life. Thank you so much, Aaron, for coming on and joining us today.
You're welcome, Kennedy.
Services for Jonas were on Friday afternoon. A GoFundMe created for his burial services has raised about $3,000 at the time of this recording. Jonas's father posted on social media thanking everyone for their donations and their kind words, writing, quote, "It's through you all I can see God's hand in all of this mess." Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Kennedi Walker.